So we're going to introduce Dr. Rebecca Avern now. Sarah's here to introduce. I'm going to get everybody.
Hi, Rebecca. So honored to introduce our next distinguished speaker, Rebecca Avern. She's an incredible acupuncturist who practices out of London, and she's going to be speaking to us virtually since she's still in London.
And she got so much of the essence of what Chinese medicine is about in a very short space of time. And I just specifically want to talk about how we view an emotion in Chinese medicine, what we think it is, how we understand it. And to put it very simply, in Chinese medicine, an emotion is a movement of qi, of energy in our body. And the English word emotion obviously has inherent within its composition the idea of movement. But Chinese medicine also understands that when the movements of qi in a person's body are disturbed, then the emotions inevitably will become disturbed too. And Chinese medicine also has a wonderful understanding of how particular emotions affect the qi differently. So, to give you a very brief example, the emotions of joy and anger are upward and expansive emotions. So they tend to cause the qi to expand and go upwards in the body. Sadness, on the other hand, tends to generate a more downward, contracted movement of qi. So when we bring about right movement of qi, balanced movement of qi in the body, then a balance of emotion will follow that. So Katie mentioned earlier some of the things that are most likely to affect the movements of qi in a child. Every child will come into the world with a different constitutional tendency, as Katie also explained, largely due to their 5-element constitution. But there are lots of factors once a child is born that will also affect their movements of qi. So an overscheduled lifestyle, a really busy routine is one. Difficult family dynamics is another. And this is the case whether or not those dynamics are expressed. In Chinese medicine, we understand that children are really like sponges to their environment, and they pick up on the emotions of people they're surrounded by, even when those emotions aren't verbalized. I would say particularly when they're not verbalized. Of course, intense or prolonged emotions within their own self will affect their movements of qi, as will a feeling of pressure or expectation to be a certain way or to achieve certain goals in their life. Diet and eating habits play an enormous role in affecting the movements of qi, as does exercise. Every child needs the right amount and the right kind of exercise for their particular constitution. So all of these things affect the movement of qi in the child's body, and one of the outcomes of that will be intense or prolonged emotions in the child as the movements of qi are impacted. And as we know, mental health difficulties involve intense or prolonged emotions. And there's a two-way relationship here. So when the qi is affected by any of these life factors, it will create an imbalance in the emotions. And the more the emotions become imbalanced, the more that will further impact the movement of qi in the body. So that's a really quick, sort of simple summary of how in Chinese medicine we understand emotions, and that lays the foundations for how we then work with emotions in the acupuncture clinic. So I want to start by sharing with you the case history of a 15-year-old boy who I'll call Alex. He was brought to me for treatment with depression. So I always first try and get a sense of the child's background and the context in which their difficulties are happening, because illness, whether it's physical or mental, emotional, does not arise in a vacuum. It arises as a result, very often, of many, many different factors, and it's really important to kind of understand the context. So Alex lives with his mum and his dad and his older sister. And the nature of his depression, and this is also where in Chinese medicine, I think this is one of the great strengths of Chinese medicine, that we have the ability to look behind the labels. One person's depression is going to feel and look very different to another's. So one of the first things I will do in the intake with a child or a teenager is try and begin to understand what depression means and feels like to that particular child. So in Alex's case, he said his mood was low. And when I delved further, he said that he was plagued by feelings of not being good enough. So his depression was very much related to his self-esteem and to huge amounts of self-critical voices. He always focused on where he could do better rather than what he had already achieved. And he told me, and his mum told me, that he'd really started to withdraw. So where he used to want to see his friends outside of school, now when he wasn't at school, he was largely spending most of his time in his bedroom, and he was even resisting eating meals with his family. Alex had also become quite disconnected from his love of learning. So up until about 18 months previously, when these issues started, Alex had loved school. He loved the learning side of school. He'd had really good connections with some of his teachers. He loved the sciences in particular, but sadly, over the last year or more, he now felt like he was just kind of going through the motions of doing his work, but he'd lost his real passion for it. He said he often felt tired and that his sleep was disturbed by very vivid, unpleasant dreams. So some of the things that Alex said that to me were crucial to making my Chinese medicine diagnosis and then giving him effective treatment were, he said, I feel exhausted after a day of school. He also said, I wish mum and my sister would just leave me alone. What's wrong with wanting time to myself? So he, on the one hand, acknowledged that he was not wanting to spend so much time with friends. On the other hand, he felt that the demands that his family were putting upon him to be with them were unreasonable. And he didn't perceive it as a problem having time on his own. He actually really enjoyed that. He backed that up by saying, I don't need to see my friends outside of school. I see them enough during school. And he said, I don't see what the point is of half of what I have to learn. It's not going to help me in my life. So these were some of the sort of what I call golden keys to really understanding what has happened with Alex, with his movements of chi that has led him to feel like this. I also, though, always get the parents' point of view as well. And this is, of course, a really big, important part of the picture. So Alex's mum said to me, I'm really worried it's not right for a 15-year-old to want to be on their own all the time. She also said he gets so cross and grumpy when we go into his room or ask him to come downstairs. I feel like I have lost connection with my boy. I'll come back to what we will make of all of this in a minute. In Chinese medicine, we also use our skills of observation, and this helps to inform our diagnosis. So I noticed that Alex's shoulders were always very hunched over, and sort of he would lean down, as it were, as if he was almost stooping. I noticed that he spoke very quietly. He was a 15-year-old boy, but his voice was very quiet, and I really had to kind of strain to hear him. So this felt like a mismatch between what I would expect and what was. He rarely looked me in the eye. And it was obvious to me that there was a lot of underlying tension between Alex and his mum. His mum, understandably, was really worried about her son, and Alex was feeling like his mum kind of wouldn't leave him alone. A common scenario between mums and teenagers. So, my TCM diagnosis is that Alex was an almost textbook metal child. And I'll talk more about how I came to that conclusion in a minute. The organ, or one of the organs associated with the metal element, is the lungs. And I also diagnosed Alex as having severe lung qi deficiency, as well as an excess of heat in his liver organ. And that was causing his bad dreams at night. So the way that I made that diagnosis was by talking to Alex, observing Alex, looking at his tongue, which gives us a lot of information as to what's going on in the body, feeling his pulse, and also looking at CSEO, color, sound, emotion, odor. So there's a lot of sensory skill, or we use our senses a lot to help diagnose imbalances of qi in Chinese medicine. So let me explain how I came to this conclusion. So in TCM, one of the functions of the lung organ is to send qi to the surface of the body. And we actually call this qi protective or defensive qi. If you have an abundance of protective qi at the surface of your body, when you go out into the world, you feel like you have a sort of ozone layer of protection, and you feel easy being in the world. You can keep out what needs to be kept out, and you can take in what needs to be taken in. But if you don't have enough protective qi, then your experience of the world can be that everything is kind of bombarding you and overwhelming you in terms of noises, other people, bright lights, emotions. You don't have that protective layer. So this was why when Alex got home from a day at school, he was absolutely exhausted because school is a busy, crazy place with lots of hubbub, lots of kind of sensory stimulation. And for a metal child, that can be really exhausting. Another function of the lungs in Chinese medicine is that they help to connect us to what we call the heavens, the heavenly qi. This is really, to put it another way, the qi that helps us to find meaning and purpose and inspiration in life. So another sign of Alex's metal element, and specifically his lungs being in trouble, is that he lost this feeling of inspiration. He actually said, I don't know what the point is of doing half of what I have to do at school. So his lungs were no longer strong enough to connect with this heavenly qi. And when we're connected with that qi, we feel that life has purpose and meaning. And another function of the metal element is not only for it to connect us to this heavenly qi, but when the metal element is healthy, a child will feel also connected inwardly to their own sense of self-worth, to their own heavenliness, if we can put it that way. And the nature of Alex's depression was that he had a lot of self-critical voices. He didn't feel good enough. All of these things that he said, everything that he felt, that then was summarized with this label of depression, related to imbalances in the movements of qi in the metal element. And interestingly, his mum expressed feeling almost heartbreak. She said, I feel like I've lost connection with my boy. And as Katie mentioned in her talk earlier, sometimes in a family, the interactions between the different members, all with different 5-element constitutions, don't work so easily. Alex's mum was a fire type. Fire types tend to feel very easily hurt and rejected and unloved. So whilst there was some basis for her worry and her anxiety about Alex, there was also a part of it which was more to do with her feelings of being rejected by her son, which is very common amongst parents of teenage children who do inevitably look for more separation and independence. So, how did I help Alex? Well, the main thing that I did was I gave him acupuncture treatment, also with moxibustion, which is the use of the herb mugwort on particular points. And I chose points that are known to strengthen the lung qi and to strengthen the spirit of the metal element. So this was with the purpose of helping him to have more protective qi at the surface of his body, helping him to feel connected with the heavenly qi, and also helping him to feel connected with his internal sense of worth. And then I talked to Alex and his mum about the nature of the metal element. And this is something that as acupuncturists, I find really, really helpful when working with the families of children whose mental health is struggling. So I was able to explain to Alex's mum that metal children are exhausted by school, that they need more time perhaps than other children alone to recuperate their qi, to replenish their energy. And once Alex's mum begun to understand this, she didn't take Alex's withdrawal so personally, and that lessened the tension between them. I explained to her that Alex probably felt really bombarded when he was at school by his external environment. And together, with me as a mediator, Alex and his mum negotiated a compromise. And that was essentially that when Alex got back from school, he would be allowed 2 or 3 hours completely on his own. His mum and his sister wouldn't barge into his bedroom. And from Alex's side, he agreed that he would come and sit and eat with the family. And it's really good when working with teenagers and children to begin to show them that it's a two-way street, relationships. You have to give and take. And that was his end of the bargain. If his mum and his sister gave him that time after school, he would then give them his time during family meals. I taught Alex some breathing exercises that he could do at home to boost his lung chi. And I also suggested to Alex that he try to find 10 minutes or so a day to walk in his local park. He was lucky he lived near one. And as he was walking, to focus on his sensory experience. What was he seeing, hearing, smelling? And metal children can get really stuck in their heads. So this is a lovely way of helping them to get back into their bodies. So the outcome was that Alex did, as he had agreed, begin to eat meals with the family, and he gradually engaged more with them. As we built up his chi with the acupuncture, he felt better able to do that. And after a couple of months, he mentioned to me that he joined the school chemistry club, which showed me that he was beginning again to feel inspired by what he was learning. And he also began to see a couple of his closest friends at the weekend. Metal kids are rarely kids that are going to have big social circles. They tend to have fewer, closer friends and just see them for a sort of set amount of time, after which they may start to feel depleted again, and then they need to be allowed to withdraw. And after about 3 months of treatment, Alex began to talk to me more about his hopes and dreams for the future, which again told me that he was connecting with that heavenly chi related to the metal element, and his depression was lifting. He also learned to voice to his mum when he needed his time alone. And his mum began to trust that and not worry so much that there was something deeply wrong with Alex for needing that. So I also want to share with you a different case history of 8-year-old Holly. Holly came to see me because she was experiencing a lot of worry and separation anxiety. She lived with her mum and dad and her younger brother Charlie and her dog Dalston, who she talked a lot about. So she said, and her mum said, I worry about everything. Particularly, Holly got very upset every morning when she was going to school and had to say goodbye to her mum. And the mornings had become really, really difficult for the whole family. She also took hours to get to sleep because of her worries. And she never wanted to go to someone else's house for a play date or a sleepover, not even to her grandparents. She only really felt free from her worries when she was at home with her family. And Holly had always had these tendencies, but in the last year or so, they had got more pronounced. And she had a very busy life. So she did, as well as school, she did lots of other after school clubs as well. I noticed that Holly was very articulate. She loved the attention I gave her. She loved her treatments. She seemed really happy when she was with me, with her mum in her treatment room, and especially when she was talking about her dog. But I did notice that even though she was 8, she always chose to sit on her mum's lap. And she liked to hold mum's hand when she was lying on my treatment couch. I also noticed that when we were trying to book appointments, it was hard to find a time because of her incredibly busy schedule. So my diagnosis of Holly was that she had an earth constitution, and I'll explain why in a minute. And specifically, her spleen, spleen is one of the organs of the earth element, was weak, as was her heart blood. So in Chinese medicine, the earth is understood to be at the center. In a child, in a person, the earth element provides us with a feeling of being literally earthed, grounded, stable. And it also gives us a sense that we have the resources we need, we can manage on our own. And the earth element being weak is a common reason why in some children separation is difficult, because they have an innate sense that they have a lack of resources to be able to manage on their own, which is why they want to stay connected to a caregiver, to a parent figure or a caregiver. The spirit of the earth element is called the yi, and this governs thinking. So when the earth element is imbalanced, the emotion that often arises is overthinking or worry. We say that the chi becomes knotted, and when the chi becomes knotted, the thoughts go round and round and round and get stuck. And this is what was happening to Holly every evening as she was trying to get to sleep. Her knotted chi meant that she would get hooked on a particular worry, and it would go round and round and round and round and stop her getting to sleep. So how did I treat Holly? Firstly, I gave her acupuncture and again this herb moxibustion to strengthen the organs of the earth element, which are the spleen and the stomach. I also used diluted essential oils, which have the quality of earth in them, on particular acupuncture points. This is another really lovely thing we can do in the pediatric clinic, particularly if a child doesn't want to be needled. Holly was fine being needled, but some children aren't. I also taught Holly's mum a pediatric tuina massage routine to calm the mind, unknot that chi and help to dissipate her worries. And her mum did this on Holly every evening at bedtime. And I also asked Holly to create her own mantra and to put it up in the bedroom. It's a really simple way of helping to empower kids to help themselves. And I've put a picture of Holly's mantra here. So her mantra said, "Everything will be okay." I can't quite read it. Something like that. She chose it. She designed it. She made it. She chose where to put it. And it was something that she could turn to and read when she felt that her worries were beginning to take over. I also gave her geranium essential oil. Geranium is an oil that very much resonates with the earth element, in a little tube that she could smell and when she needed it. So she carried it in her pocket at school. And when she felt her worries beginning to rise, she would take out her little smelly and have a smell, and that would help to calm her. And we talked about some useful drop-off strategies at school. So sometimes earth children become overly worried about others. And that can include being overly worried about their parents. And sometimes I got the feeling that as well as being worried about herself, one of the things that made it hard for Holly to separate was that she was worried that how her mum was going to be when they weren't together. So they created a wonderful little game. So when they said goodbye to each other at school, they said, "I'm okay, you're okay, see you at the end of the day." It brought in a bit of humour. It reassured both Mum and Holly that they were both going to be okay until they saw each other next time. And I also discussed with Holly and her mum about dropping some of Holly's commitments, because all of those commitments consume chi, and Holly was essentially deficient in chi, particularly the chi of the organs connected with the earth element. And I suggested that instead of the commitment, Mum and Holly spent that time doing something quietly at home together. Children feed off the chi of their parents. So even creating 10 or 20 minutes a day of one-to-one time between parent and child can really help to replenish what we call the postnatal chi of the child. We also talked about some dietary changes, and for Holly to add in some foods in her diet that particularly nourish the spleen. So over the course of about 3 months, school drop-offs became much easier. Monday mornings were always the most difficult one, but they were much easier for Holly, and this lifted some strain not only off Holly but off the family as a whole. It's never good for a family to have to start the day with lots of intense emotions. After about 4 months of seeing her, Holly was really excited to tell me that she had actually voluntarily said to her mum, "Mum, I don't need you to come into school with me. I want you to say goodbye at the school gates." So this was real kind of concrete evidence that Holly's earth was stronger. She had the ability to feel centered and strong in herself without her mum. She was loving her massage routines in the evening, and getting to sleep on average about 45 minutes earlier. And she was also excited to tell me that she had been on a play date at her best friend's house and had also had her first sleepover with her grandparent. So these are the kinds of changes that we look for. We want to see changes in behavior that are evidence of a change in the internal movements of chi. So to summarize, when we balance the movements of chi in a child, their emotions become more balanced, less intense, less prolonged. And the many TCM modalities that we have available, such as acupuncture, massage, moxibustion, laser acupuncture, which is another great therapy for kids who don't want needles, essential oils, are all really well tolerated, and they're effective ways at creating more balanced movements of chi. We can also give good home therapies such as dietary changes, schedule changes, lifestyle additions or changes that support and back up what we do in clinic. And some children don't necessarily know or understand or struggle to articulate what they're feeling. But within TCM, we have really reliable diagnostic methods, such as looking at color, eyes, looking at the tongue, taking the pulse, that mean we don't require children who can't or don't want to articulate their feelings to do so. So we see every child as completely unique and needing a somewhat different approach, and we treat them all in a bespoke way within the contexts of a good therapeutic relationship. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was such a helpful lecture to help really ground these concepts that can sometimes be kind of philosophical and hard to understand in these really real world examples. So really appreciate that. I'll open this up for any questions if we have any questions in the room. Also, if there's any questions virtually, you guys can type that into the box. So any questions from the audience?
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to hear the cases, and I think it's very inspiring for everyone that works with kids and adolescents. I was wondering if the use of social media interferes differently with each type of Chinese structure, and I would like to hear a little bit about it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Absolutely. So, I would say that fire children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of social media, because what fire children most need is a calm, constant emotional state, and being on social media often induces a roller coaster of emotions, and they're particularly vulnerable to being excluded, to feeling hurt by nasty comments, etc. I would say in terms of video games, that water and wood children tend to suffer the worst effects, particularly very adrenalizing video games, because those two elements very easily become kind of over adrenalized, and all the sort of yang energy of the body rises up to the head. They're often the ones who, when they're told to come off their video games, get really grumpy because they have a kind of literally like an adrenaline withdrawal. So I would say excessive time on social media or on video games is not good for any child, but those are the three elements that I feel are particularly kind of vulnerable.
Hi, thank you for speaking to us today. I was I was just kind of thinking and reflecting on this five-element theory model, and um, thinking about the way that it's sort of applied to personality structure. I was wondering, I had two questions. The first one, have there been correlations? It almost sounds like there are correlations between that and personality disorders. Um, Has anyone ever really kind of taken a look at whether or not they sort of link up? I was just kind of thinking about it in my own mind, and, the idea of somebody being fiery, I sort of associate that with like emotional lability, and, maybe like something like that, or whether it, if not personality structures, then perhaps like actual like Western diagnostic categories in the DSM, like something like
Right.
Earth kind of sounds like a type of OCD flavor. And I just wanted to see if that's ever been something that you've looked at.
Yeah, so that's another interesting question. As far as I'm aware, that's not anything that's been studied, but I would say that every element type can experience every one of the wide gamut of mental health disorders in the DSM, but they would all do it in their own element flavored way, as it were. So I think that what we've sort of talked about today is, out of necessity because of time, a somewhat kind of simplified model. I think is true to say that there are probably some element types that are more prone to some particular mental health disorders, but every element type could develop everyone, but they would just do it in a slightly different way. So unfortunately, it would be so kind of convenient and easy if what your question was suggesting with a case, but I think the reality is a lot more complex than that, unfortunately.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see any from the online cohort here.
Lots of questions.
Okay, final question.
I was curious around the idea of breath strengthening the lungs for like protective boundaries. So, but especially with a person who maybe needs like a metal approach with breathing and boundarying, but then also maybe who's very sensitive with like a fire quality as well, and how you would approach the need for like maybe breath work in that case.
So I think that when the lungs of the metal element become deficient or imbalanced, then the natural breath becomes less effective, as it were. And then that creates a vicious circle because then the lungs aren't receiving enough chi and then they become more deficient. So I would say any breath work, simple kind of square breathing, just slightly slowing down the breathing, box breathing, can really help to replenish the lungs. Having said that, that's going to be helpful for a fire type 2, because as we know, breathing helps to regulate the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's going to help any child of any element. But when it's a metal child, it just becomes like a really, really fundamental core part of what they need. It's not that I wouldn't recommend that to another element type child as well. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Rebecca. This is Lurico. Thank you for the
Oh, hi,
talk.
Lurico.
My question wasn't particularly TCM, but it was about navigating child health care when you're dealing with parents who are divorced and acrimonious, or one parent being open to Chinese medicine or so-called complementary medicine versus the other parent is very biomedical. How do you navigate helping that child because they're the victim of that conflict between the parents?
Yeah. Really good question, Noriko. So the first thing to say is in divorced parents, in my practice, it is often just one of the parents that is initiating bringing their child for treatment and that brings them for every session. And I sometimes don't have contact with the other parent in the mix. But I think that if I get the sense that there is skepticism or even resistance from the second parent, I always insist on a joint meeting with both parents, and I will explain to them that for me to best be able to help their child, we all need to work as a team. When there is conflict between the parents that the child is a victim of, then I think my focus is on the fact that with treatment, I can help the child to better withstand the negative impact of their parents' acrimonious divorce. Obviously, sadly, I can't fix the relationship between the parents, but if the child's receiving treatment, the effect of that is going to be less detrimental. So my underlying principle is I want everyone to work together, and I will do whatever I can to try and bring that about, sometimes more successfully than others.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. When you were speaking about Alex and how he changed about 18 months ago, the first thing I actually wondered was if there had been some type of acute traumatic event that the parents might not be aware of, like in a situation of like abuse or bullying at school. I was wondering how those kinds of considerations might factor into your diagnosis and treatment process.
Yeah, so I wondered that too when I first saw Alex. And I always ask a lot around what was going on at that time when things began to change and get difficult. Sometimes the child or the parent isn't able to actually pinpoint something, either because they're not aware of it or because the child doesn't want to. But I might still sense in the child, they may look away from me, they may withdraw a bit more, that there was something that went on, even though they're not yet ready to reveal what that was. There are particular channels and organs in Chinese medicine that we know are affected by shock. So it may change my treatment into bringing in more of those channels. In Alex's case, I believe what actually triggered his depression was the onset of puberty. And for a metal child, and this often goes on very unconsciously, when they sense that they're changing, that they're moving away from being a child and going more towards becoming an adult, that inherently involves some loss, some letting go, some grief in terms of letting go elements and aspects of childhood and of being a child. And I think in Alex's case, that's what compromised his metal element, because the metal element is responsible for dealing with feelings of grief. And I think the other factor for Alex was, which is often a factor for metal types, is he had huge expectations of himself. And often as children, we can have the fantasy that we're going to be, a Hollywood star, or we're going to be the next Albert Einstein, or whatever it may be. And that's another loss. It's generally around adolescence that most of us have to get to be okay with the fact that we're probably not going to be something we've spent our childhood dreaming of. And that's another loss. And that challenges the lung organ, and it challenges the metal element. So I think in Alex's case, that was really what was going on. He was very vulnerable to that, being a metal child.
Thank you.
Hi, Rebecca. I was wondering whether you use herbal medicine in your practice and how you go about that. And secondly, if you do, or if not, how you collaborate with psychiatric care in regards to medication in youth, and how you work with Chinese medicine in that regard.
Sure, yeah. So I do use Chinese herbal medicine, and I normally prescribe it in granule form, which is easy for kids to take, sometimes in tinctures once they're old enough, and if they're happy to swallow tablets, I might give it in tablet form. And if they're on any psychiatric medication, then I always insist on directly liaising with their psychiatrist and letting them know what I am wanting to prescribe, and checking that there are no drug-herb interactions.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you again, Rebecca. We're so grateful to have you here, and I know you speech earlier.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. We'll see you in class tomorrow.
Perfect.